We are designed to gather. How many of you have ever been to one of these? That was your cue. There we go. How many of you have been to one of these? How many want to go back? All right. Oh, listen, be honest. You are planning your next trip ahead of time so you can stop at Buc-ee's. And if you're not, you just haven't really experienced Buc-ee's. I'm thrilled to tell you there is a Buc-ee's coming to Ocala. We might be doing date night, Sarah, in Ocala. You talk about a congregation. It is a madhouse. Look at the insides. Let me just tell you, if you hadn't been to Buc-ee's, it is not your average service station. It is like a Bass Pro Shop, a Cracker Barrel, and a Shell station had birth. They gave birth to a baby. It is unbelievable. It takes up like 20 acres, and it has hundreds of pumps, hundreds. And you go in, and there's literally a couple thousand people that can get in one of these. And it's shopping, and the bathrooms are designed, when you walk into the restrooms, they're cavernous, covered with expensive art, and they are designed to just make you go, wow. And if you didn't do that when you went in a Buc-ee's bathroom, something is wrong with you. It's just an amazing place, and I expect my kickback from Buc-ee's any day now. I'm serious, you ought to try it out. Used to be I had to stop at a Cracker Barrel, we'd plan around someplace, and now it's hard to drive by, for me, a Buc-ee's. But you know, it ought to be harder to drive by our Sunday morning gathering. And I got to thinking about the similarities between a Buc-ee's and church. And only this weird pastor would do that. I remember, how many of you are old enough to remember the days of full serve filling stations? All right, y'all a bunch of old people in here, huh? And how many of you, I'm old enough to remember that barely. And then I remember the advent of self-serve. Let me tell you how this happens. The full serve is, I can remember, Mom and Dad, we'd go in and you'd roll down the window and a guy would come up to you and say, and you'd go, fill her up. You want regular? Well, back then it was only regular. Then you had unleaded. And then while they're filling it up, they'd check your oil and stuff. I mean, it was kind of a wild time. And you never had to get out of the car. Your experience with the filling station was one little conversation with this guy. And then he did it all. Then it got to self-service, and you eliminated that guy. And so you went to the filling station, you went to the service station, gas station, and you had no experience with any other people, and you got your fuel. And that is no way to have a spiritual life. We are not designed to just have self-service spirituality. But I'll tell you why a lot of people don't want to congregate is because self-service spirituality is easier. That's why. You can do it in your pajamas. And you can do it without having to deal with us. Deal with people. Buc-ee's, however, has the idea. I'll get them out of their car. I will serve them really, really good barbecue. I'll serve them great food. You go into Buc-ee's, you can eat. It's got a lot of great food. And I will create in Buc-ee's a spectacle. And I will have great customer service. So when they go in, you'll feel like the Buc-ee's people there care that you're there. It's going to be a spectacle. And so Buc-ee's decided we're going to draw everybody in off of their journey to experience a refueling and a refreshing so that they can continue on their journey happier and better. I feel that way about every Sunday morning. I want you to come and be refueled, be refreshed, rejuvenated, maybe convicted, Maybe you come in and you get your oil changed. You realize I need some help. But this ought to be a place where you come and you rub elbows with people. You meet people and you meet God. This ought to never be driven by, if at all possible. It ought to be the plan of your week. It ought to be your week ought to be planned around this hour. That's a little bold for me to say. You don't ever have to go to Buc-ee's, I don't care. But we have something to offer when we gather that you can't get anywhere else. Now, what would that be? Well, look at Acts chapter 2, verse 41. So those who received his word, what word is that? The gospel. Those who heard the gospel, believed it, were what? They had a little spectacle. They were publicly baptized for others to see. They didn't go home and do it in the pool by themselves. They did it in front of people. They did it with a congregation of people watching. And there were added that day about 3,000 souls. I love it. There must have been a Baptist in that group because they counted. And they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching. Wonder why he put that first. This gathering must contain the teaching of God's word. It is our food. It is our meal. It is our fuel. We must teach, and it doesn't matter if it's me, but we must come humbly, corporately to the feet of Jesus, who speaks with his Spirit through his word. We need to gather for that. They did. It's natural. These are brand new believers. They didn't have to twist their arm. They're just saying, let's get together. We want to hear this. We want to grow in this. We want to know the apostles' teaching. And fellowship. They were gathering together to the breaking of bread and the prayers. And awe came over every soul, and many wonders and signs were being done through the apostles. And all who believed were together and had all things in common. And they were selling their possessions and belongings and distributing the proceeds to all as any had need. And day after day, attending the temple, how? Together. And breaking bread in their homes, they received their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having favor with all the people. And the Lord added to their number. And so whatever it was, they were gathering at homes, gathering at the temple. This was the Buc-ee's experience because God was there. It was a spectacle of life change, and people wanted to come and hear and understand the teachings of Christ. And so they gathered together. But just a few decades later, Hebrews, he's getting on to some of these same folks, and he's saying, by now you ought to be teachers, but you're still drinking milk. It's been several decades. And then in Acts chapter 10, verse 24, it says, and now let's consider how to stir one another up, to stir and wake up each other to love and good works. Isn't it amazing what's happened between Acts chapter 2 and now? We're having to stir one another up to love and good works, not neglecting the gathering, the corporate gathering, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another. And we need to do this even more as we see the day of Christ drawing near.